This is Spawn Island. This is a large-scale creative project I've been working on for a number of months that's essentially designed to be a full-sized Minecraft theme park right in the middle of a survival multiplayer server. The idea is that players can come to the park and ride rides, visit attractions, and even play mini-games where they can earn tokens that they can spend on items, or enchantments, or all kinds of goodies that can make their survival experience more fun and more rich. And this project is far from finished. I've been working on it for quite a while, and it now lives on the UECraft survival multiplayer server. But that's not what we're here to talk about right now. So if you'd like to learn more about this project, you can follow me over on Twitch, or you can keep your eyes on the YouTube channel because I am going to be posting some update videos on the progress and talking about the whole thing and how it went together. But for now, we are going to be moving this way and taking a look at what lives right in the center. So over here in the middle of Spawn Island is a really, really big hole. And in that big hole is a bunch of creative plots. Now I wanted creative plots on my server, I knew that. And I wanted them to be a part of Spawn Island, but I knew I wasn't going to have the server resources to use the multiverse plugin and get multiple world files running at the same time so that people could be in creative mode in a separate world. And the reason you generally do that is to make sure that players can't cheat items into the game, change their experience level, or otherwise break their survival game by going into creative mode. So the challenge I put to myself was accomplish that same goal, but, like, in the same world. And I think I've pretty much nailed it. There are definitely some flaws in this still. I know it's not perfect, but I'd like to show you what I have so far, and I'd love to hear, in the comments below, how you would suggest improving this design, how it would be possible to break this design, and otherwise, what might be wrong with it. The idea here was for people to have as much opportunity as possible to be creative and spread their wings, but not be able to ruin their survival gameplay. And so the design in here reflects that. It's a simple color palette, mostly white and black. It's not extremely bright until you get up here higher up. It's a relatively neutral room with low lighting that allows players to more or less do whatever they want. What we're here to talk about is how the plots actually function. And that's something I'm going to show you firsthand, but before we do that, I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine right over here. Spectator. We call him Botman. He's a good guy, but he doesn't talk much. So without further ado, there's one main thing that you should know about this design, and it's that it relies on permissions and plugins that are on your server, which means that as an OP'd member of the server, these plots do not work properly for me. And that makes sense. An OP'd member of the server can change their game mode and do all sorts of other things that these plots do for you, so there's not really any reason for it to work for an OP'd player. However, I would really be interested if somebody were able to make it do so. So here I am, on Botman's account, standing in front of his plot, and as you can see, before I've entered, I can't even break blocks inside my own plot. I can't pick, I can't do anything over here, and the same is true, just as proof, for anybody else's plot as well. And you'll see when I walk in, I get a notification of which plot I'm in and who it belongs to. In this case, the plot belongs to Benzagon, one of the members of our server. And even inside his plot, which is functional, I can't break anything. However, if I walk across the path into my own plot, you can see that the console tells me that creative mode has been enabled. And that means that I can now break blocks inside my own plot. I can place blocks, I can fly and move around, I can do pretty much whatever I want in creative mode, barring a few things that we'll get into later. And you'll notice that if I walk outside the plot, my inventory is cleared, and I'm returned to survival mode, no longer able to fly, no longer able to pick blocks, or even break blocks inside my own plot. all of that is stripped from the player, and they're essentially returned to normal survival. And you can even see, just as an example, we're going to give the spectator 115 points of experience, okay? So he now has an experience level of 8, which means he can walk in, he's put into creative mode, and when he walks back out, he did not lose that experience. He's still experience level 8. Now, in creative mode, you could spawn in items that would raise your experience, and for that reason, those items are now limited and not allowed in creative mode within these plots. And how that works, we will get into after we get underground to the circuitry, but I still want to show you a little bit more functionality of what it's like to actually use the plots. So you can pick blocks, you can build, you have pretty much whatever freedom you want. You can even pick blocks from outside your plot, although you cannot place blocks outside your plot. That's not an option. But let's get some light in here. I had considered giving players access to World Edit while they're in here, but the unfortunate issue with that is World Edit has an infinite raycast and does not care at all about what the permissions of the player using it are. So with the power of World Edit, they would be able to do anything they wanted to anything that they could see. So World Edit, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, will not work for this function. If you find a way for it to work, please tell me immediately, because I really want to know. What if I wanted a potion of invisibility? You'll notice it immediately disappears from my inventory as soon as I grab it. No matter what I do, I'm not allowed to take any of these potions of any kind. They just immediately disappear from my inventory. So anything that they could use to give themselves or somebody else in the creative area a status effect will not function. Players are also not allowed to have end portal blocks, or end portal frames, excuse me. You can hold the end portal frame, but if you try to place it, it will not work. You can get everything you need to make a nether portal. For example, I have the obsidian, I have the flint and steel. Okay? Ready? Let's go to the nether. Here we go. It's nether time. Oh, I guess I won't be doing that. Oh, what a bummer. Shoot, looks like I'm not allowed to have nether portals inside here either. So there will be no passing items through the nether to get them to your survival account. Now, unfortunately, these do have some downsides when it comes to aesthetics. There are certain useful things you can do with end portal frame blocks, and it's always nice to have the option to use a nether portal just for looks. But unfortunately, for these to work in this capacity, it's just not an option. The simplest thing is always to have a higher power server and use the multiverse plugin, and that just keeps the players completely separate when they're in creative mode and guarantees you no issues and the players can do whatever they want with creative mode. But if you're stuck in the situation I am, where they need to work on a single world file, this really gets the job done. It gives people a lot of creative freedom, and not very many things are actually limited. So, there are a couple of other blocks that you cannot place inside these plots. You can't place an ender chest, because that would allow players to access their survival inventory. You also cannot place a dispenser, because those can be used to dump items directly into a player's inventory, even if they are outside the plot. So for that reason, those are the blocks that you can't place. No dispensers, no ender chests, no end portal frames. Okay? You can have droppers, which used to not be allowed before the nether portal problem was fixed. But you now can have droppers, and the reason for that is in the entirety of Spawn Island, there's no item pickup. So even if something were to be placed into these and just dispensed out here in scores, all they would successfully create is a lag machine. Now, on a larger server that requires moderation, it might be ideal to block droppers, but I would expect a larger server would be able to do the multiverse plugin anyway, so I don't think that that's really a main concern here. This is something that's generally designed for smaller servers. But Austin, you might be asking, what if I do have something in my inventory when I walk into the plot? Well, do I have an answer for you? What if, for example, I had 5 stone in my inventory? Every time a player leaves the plot, their inventory gets wiped, which means they cannot walk into the plot with their survival inventory, because they will be risking losing all of their stuff. This is a multi-part process, what happens as a player enters their plot, that we will break down in the circuitry down below in a moment. But, from the player's perspective, this is what happens. Oh no, I walked into my plot with inventory. The console tells me the inventory is detected and that a recovery has begun, and then as soon as that recovery is complete, this appears to my right, which I can then use to recover my inventory. Oh look, there's a chest with my inventory. Oh, but for some reason I'm not allowed to access it. And why would that be? That's because if you can get to this before pressing this button, it stands the chance to break the plots. So what I've implemented here is a sort of safety. After your inventory's been recovered, you are not able to enter your plots. There are convenient ender chests located in the elevator down to the creative area if anybody needs to drop last-minute emergency items, but it's encouraged to come to these plots with an empty inventory if you can. You can design these plots such that players can re-enter in this state and are unable to access their inventory until they've left. I do not have that setting on because it runs the risk of a player returning without having cleared their inventory, at which point the recovery process starts again, and this chest would be overwritten. So this is currently set in a way that's extra secure, but you could turn that setting off so that players can walk back in and continue to build with their items in this chest for storage. Can't access the chest, can't access my plot, but what I can do is press that button, and it tells me my inventory has been returned, and they can be recovered from the chest, and it tells me to return to the plot with an empty inventory. So there are my 5 stone. We have them in hand, and we're good to go, and this will work for any and all items with NBT tags or anything, so let me demonstrate that. So you can see I'm now holding an enchanted and named pick. It's named Silky, it has Mending and Silk Touch. All the information about the item, such as the name, any lore that's associated, or the enchantments you've put on the item, those are all stored by the game as data tags. And I am tracking all of those tags as well when items are recovered. So you'll see, I'll walk in with my fancy netherite Silk Touch pick named Silky. I'll be kicked out of the plot because I had inventory, and as soon as it's done recovering, this appears. Once again, can't open it, but if I press the button and access the chest, well, there's Silky with Mending and Silk Touch, just as I left it, as though nothing ever happened. And as soon as that chest is empty, it disappears, and I can once again enter my plot. However, if I do immediately enter my plot, the same process will just happen again. The players have creative mode. If they reach the edge, they'll be immediately teleported to the ground. Even if they reach the top edge, you'll see I was still inside the boundaries of my plot, but they have a vertical limit as well, and when I reach that, I'm dropped back to the ground, even though I'm put back into creative mode. And you'll just be dropped down to the nearest ground. It doesn't immediately teleport you to this Y level. It teleports you to the nearest ground. And that's just because of the way the Essentials teleport command functions. So I've leveraged that. Ooh. That seems bad. Oopsie. Looks like there's a design error here that I just noticed while recording. The folly of world edit, unfortunately. Well, obviously these are supposed to be rotated 180 degrees. But the reason they're teleported is to prevent item theft. Because, thanks to the Essentials teleport command, players can be kicked out of any and all inventories that they're accessing. Any UI that the player is accessing can be interrupted by the Essentials version of the teleport command. I've found that that doesn't happen with the standard Minecraft teleport command. I don't know why that is. If somebody could tell me, that would be excellent news. I have a feeling it's because Minecraft won't teleport a player to themselves, which is essentially what I'm doing here. the player just gets teleported to their own location. But if you do get teleported while, for example, accessing a chest, let me just give you an idea of one of the brilliant ways that my testers managed to break these plots. So say I also wanted to steal a chest because I'm some sort of Matryoshka doll fan. All I would have to do in the original design of these plots is take a rail and a powered rail and power that powered rail. It became perfectly possible to steal items by rolling out of the plot while interacting with the chest. So as soon as I catch that redstone rail, I'm going to be propelled forward and clear off the track and out of my plot. However, I get kicked out of the inventory. Right as soon as I cross the line, I'm kicked out of the cart, I'm kicked out of the inventory. There's nothing you can do. It is now time to hop to my main account so that I can show you the real goodies of how this works. So underneath each and every single one of these plots is a redstone circuit, which I'm sure is not the least bit surprising. Now, to make things easier and a little bit less ominous, I am going to give myself night vision. Okay, that's much better. So, as you can see in the top right corner of your screen, we have Botman's view in glorious picture-in-picture so that you can see what happens, and when he walks into the plot, WorldGuard is going to run a command because of one of the flags that I've set for WorldGuard. One of the flags WorldGuard has can run either a console or a player-specific command when the player enters the plot. And so I have a console command running when the player enters their plot, and it only runs when the player enters their plot, that will place a redstone block right here, and that's what essentially starts the circuit. Botman walks inside, and the redstone block appears. And then when Botman walks out again, the redstone block is taken away. If I just place a redstone block here, the plot will run as though everything's completely normal. Botman can fly, he has creative mode. There are no limits, he's out. So you need to make sure that the area where the circuitry is for these plots is 100% definitely off limits. In fact, if you need to create a region in WorldGuard specifically for that area and mark it so that the players can't enter, that would be a way to guarantee that they couldn't get their hands on the circuit, because if you just place a redstone block here like this, the player is free. Now, if they go back inside their plot and try to leave again, everything is active, so it will shut them back down again if they happen to make that mistake. As long as there's a way to get a redstone block placed right there, creative mode is live yet again. So, the placing and removing of this redstone block serve to activate and deactivate all of the parts of the logic for the creative plots. Let's go through one leg at a time, because there are 4 main sections to this, and so we're going to tackle them one at a time. And the first circuit here is the circuit that runs when the block is placed. So as you can see, while there is no block, all of this is off. So 3 circuits run when the block is placed. This one, that one, and the one with all the purple blocks, which are repeating command blocks. So this is the one we're going to go through first. The command block gets placed, and then the first thing that happens is, using the essentials message command, the console tells the player that they're in creative mode. And then that starts the entire chain reaction that activates the entire plot. And this is very misleading in terms of scale, but we'll get into that in just a second. We're going to go through this in order. After the player is notified with a simple message command, the second block that activates puts the player into creative mode. Then we have a chain of command blocks that activate all of the necessary settings for the WorldGuard region that is each person's plot. As I'm sure you can tell already, WorldGuard is a main function of how this system works. Each plot is defined by a region in the WorldGuard plugin. And what that means is it takes an area of the Minecraft map from a certain set of coordinates to another set of coordinates, and it draws a three-dimensional shape, and everything within that shape has the game rules that are defined within that region, including some of the standard game rules, but also including some extra specific rules that WorldGuard has added. And there are even some third-party add-ons that can allow you to go even further with this. Be careful with those because they're not supported directly by WorldGuard, so they're not always going to work, especially if you're working with an extremely up-to-date version of Minecraft. That can end up backfiring and cause things to not work. So those third-party add-ons can be a bit finicky. But there are actually only a few settings that need to be put onto the region for the plot when the plot starts up. And that is allowing the players to build in the region, allowing the players to use in the region, and use includes doors, levers, buttons, anything the player can interact with, which can be confusing because there's also an interact flag. And in the literature for WorldGuard, I couldn't piece together exactly what the difference is, but I'm not here to teach you how to use WorldGuard. I'm here to teach you how to use these creative plots, so all you need to know right now is that use works. First command allows members to build. This command allows members to use. This command disallows, so you can see it says deny at the end. And this prevents entry for non-members. WorldGuard regions have both owners and members. Owners are a sort of higher level control over the plot, which is not necessary for this, so you just make people members. And then anybody that's not a member will be barred from entry while the player is in the plot. And the reason for that is because if somebody is inside the plot when the plot activates, it can break the system. I'm not sure what it is about WorldGuard, but even though it's only supposed to run the command to place the redstone block when a member enters, for some reason, if a member is inside the plot, and a non-member is also inside the plot, and the non-member walks out, the plot will deactivate creative mode. And I'm not quite sure why that happens. In all of my testing, I could not piece together why that is, but I ended up just simplifying things, by disallowing non-members from entering while a member is in the plot. And there's also an extra command added on to the end over there somewhere. So you can see non-members, command on entry, warp, creative. And so that's command on entry, which means it's run from the perspective of the player that's named, in that case, a non-member. So if there's somebody who's not a member of the plot, when the plot is activated, they are warped to the creative area, which actually will send them back to the central point in the elevator that we entered at the beginning of this video. So those two, both the warp to creative and then denying non-members from entering the plot, those two features combine to make sure that no non-member is ever going to be in the plot while a user is actually using their plot. Alright, from here, all the way through all of these back and forth, all the way over until you get to here. So this entire snake, from this corner all the way to here, all of these blocks serve to collect the player's inventory. So as soon as we have given them build permissions, given them use permissions, and denied non-members from entering, the creative plot is technically active. So imagine my frustration upon learning that these 4 blocks were not going to be enough, and that I was going to need that in order to make the system function. And all of that, and then both of these, all of this stuff is all part of the inventory recovery system. So we're going to get into that section next. Supposedly, in 1.17, this is going to get a lot less complicated, because the main issue here is that there is, in fact, a simple Minecraft command that will copy over part of the player's inventory and save it into a chest. And that's this command right here that I have highlighted on the screen, and that will be put up a little more clearly for easy reading and comfort. But what this command essentially does is it says, modify the block data of the block at these coordinates, which in this case happens to direct this command block to this chest right here. And this chest sits empty or will contain the last items that were in the player's inventory when they walked into the plot. The first stage of that process requires a clone command, and that's because this chest, which is half full of bedrock, is crucial to the process that collects the player's inventory. So that chest there is half full of bedrock. This chest is either completely empty or populated by the last inventory that the player had when they walked in. Another reason why you would want players to be absolutely barred from entering this region would be because they have an easy item duplication system if they can get in here. So definitely do not let players into this region. That would be a bad idea. No bueno. So, chest on the left, half bedrock, half empty. Chest on the right, either empty or possibly filled with random items from the last time the player walked in. Doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because the first block right here copies that half bedrock chest over one to the right so that it's here. So when the player walks in, this will immediately be cloned to look exactly like this. And so all this chest on the left serves to be is a template that can be copied over here so that this is reset to default every time the player enters. After that has been reset to the template, we run our first data modification command that I've already shown you, which modifies the block data of that second chest, the one that was just updated with the template, and it populates some of the inventory slots on that chest with items from the player's inventory. And the reason it's only some is because player inventories work in a very specific way. They are numbered starting with your hotbar, then proceeding to the top row of your larger inventory, then the second row of your larger inventory, then the third row of your larger inventory. And after that, there are separate values, all of which are on the screen, for each inventory slot that is a wearable item and for the player's offhand. And in fact, these numbers are much larger, I think, just to distinguish them from the larger inventory in the event that they ever decide to give us more inventory. Which means that the space is there and they just don't use it, which I find rather upsetting. But we're going to move on from that for right now, and I'm going to try and keep that rage inside. So, recap. Template chest. First block of this system copies the template over to this chest. So this chest would be half bedrock, except not full stacks like that. The point is it will look like this. But it won't look like that for very long, because this command runs. And what that command does, it copies those first three rows, and when I say first three, I do mean your hotbar, top row of your inventory, and the second row of your inventory. And those items will get pasted into these bottom three rows of the chest, which is why in the template, those are left empty. Because that command is built into Minecraft and functions very nicely without any funny business. The bedrock is for the funny business that's coming later to get the rest of the inventory. Hold on, I need some water. This is a lot of words. Okay. Alright. The reason that only those three lines are copied is because, just like there are numbers for the inventory spots for the player, there are also numbers for the inventory spots in a chest. And unless that number matches, the item won't be copied. So it doesn't matter what's in the player's inventory, anything that's not in a slot that has the same value as the slot in a chest is not going to be copied, and double chests do not get extra values, So the top half of a double chest is a chest, and the bottom half of a double chest is a chest, and they each have the same slot values all the way through, just repeated. So what that means is you can only ever copy a maximum of 3 inventory rows worth of items into a chest. And only those exact 3, because there's no way to shift those values in any way so that the next remaining items get pasted into earlier slots. At least, not yet. It looks like in 1.17 there's going to be something called the item command that's going to give us all sorts of new powers to do exactly what I struggled to do here. So this video is almost obsolete, which is why I need to get it out right now, before it doesn't matter anymore. Breathe, Austin. Breathe. It's gonna be okay. So, we have to fill in the rest of these spaces with the rest of the player inventory. And so, away go the rest of our commands. One at a time, we run another modify block data command. And it works like this. It selects the particular chest that we need to copy to, which, to refresh your memory, is the top half of this chest. Counts as a single chest. So we copy to that specific block. A standard data modify block command targeting that specific chest. And then you say you target the items as the path, but you can specify a slot with the following in brackets. So you do larger brackets, then curly braces, and inside that capital SLOT colon 0B, and there needs to be a block inside the slot you're targeting in order for the command to work, which is why there's all that bedrock in the template chest. You add .id to the end, because this is about to get worse. I'll explain why in a moment. Some of you are already ahead of me. And you say set from entity, you choose your player, and then you say from their inventory as the path, and then in curly braces define the slot of the item you want to claim, and then say .id. But Austin, what does .id mean? That sounds like the block ID. It sounds like at that point you're done. And you'd be totally right about that if it weren't for that whole thing I told you about earlier. You remember Silky? That's got its own name and 2 enchantments on it. Do you remember what I said those are? Those are data tags. And NBT data tags cannot be copied over along with the block ID. They need to be copied over separately. So, for each individual slot that we have remaining, which actually isn't that many, I'll remind you, we've already copied the hotbar and the top 2 rows of the inventory. So all we have is these 9 inventory slots, the 4 armor slots, and the offhand slot. That's all that's left to copy. But the unfortunate reality is we have to have 3 command blocks for each one of these. Now, I did not figure this out, so I'm going to throw out credit to the fantastic forum responder on the screen right now, who figured this out and did recommend in their post that you do this for every single item in the inventory so that you can decide which item goes to what slot. But in the case of what we're doing here, it doesn't actually matter because it's an emergency recovery system. So it's okay if the items get back to them out of order. People will be happy to just have their items back. So we use the easy command for the first 3 slots, and then we apply their method for everything remaining. So the first block gets .id. The second block, the commands are exactly identical, except .count is present on both of the paths. The items, slot 0b, .count, and the inventory, slot 100b, .count. So we had ID, we have count, which, as I'm sure you can guess, is how many of the block, and then we have tag, and this copies over all of the NBT tags that are associated with any item. As far as I can tell, it will not miss anything. I hope that's true. I've tested it with lore, I've tested it with names, I've tested it with enchantments, I've tested it with custom NBT data that's been applied. It keeps it all. So, fellow internet lunatic, thank you for figuring this out. Because without you, these plots would have been pointless. We're not going to go through all of these blocks individually, but that's what these blocks are doing. So in groups of 3, 1, 2, and 3, we're copying over all of the data for one slot at a time of the remaining 1 row of inventory and 4 slots of armor plus an offhand. So that's 3 command blocks for each of these individual slots, and each of those gets copied into this chest. So as a demonstration, what we're going to do is fully load Botman's inventory and then have him walk in, and you will see that this chest gets filled with exactly his inventory. So this way Botman has a completely full inventory, complete with some interesting things we can check, like 20 red sand, a full stack of ancient debris, 2 red sandstone walls, and a pick with a name and 2 enchantments on it that we can track. Oh, and I guess 5 stone also, and 64 sea lanterns. Look, the point that you get my point here. Okay, we have something that we can check. We want to get a look at this large chest right here. We won't be able to stay in it while it happens, but I'll be able to show you a before and after. So all at once, when Botman walks into the plot, this chest of bedrock will get copied over to here, and then this chest, which will then be half bedrock and half air, will be populated with all of Botman's inventory, which will not completely fill this chest. Because again, as you remember, the second half is only being filled by 1 full row of inventory, as well as Botman's armor and his offhand slot. So, let's see how that happens. So Botman walks into the plot. He's immediately kicked out. His notifications are off because I'm hiding chat right now. But if we look inside this chest, you can see there is everything that Botman had, complete with the Silk Touch pick, 2 red sandstone walls, 20 red sand, 5 stone, 64 ancient debris, all of the armor, and the offhand shield. So, after we've gotten them all copied, you see the last command is to remove all of the bedrock that's still in the chest, and then we get to some of the interesting logic. All this command block does is place a sea lantern directly above itself, and it serves to verify that there's not a bug in the circuit. The reason we have it placing a sea lantern above itself is that's something that we can reliably guarantee will succeed. And what I mean by succeed is Minecraft command blocks, like many blocks in Minecraft, have a specific strength output that can come from them if you put them next to a comparator. And in the case of a command block, what it is counting is whether or not it was able to successfully run a command. So if it's powered, and the command that the command block is programmed to run has either already been done, for example, if there were already a sea lantern above this block, and it tried to place a sea lantern, that would fail, because there's already a sea lantern there, so nothing needs to be done. But just because a command block failed does not mean it will not continue the chain. And if there is not a sea lantern above here, which means the machine is functioning correctly, it will place a sea lantern above here, which will mean the success count of this block, say get the data from that block. If I want something specific, I can say success count, and it tells me that information. Has the following block data for what I requested. And if I had requested that incorrectly, it would not feed me an answer, it would feed me an error message. It's currently at a success count of 0. If it were at a success count anywhere other than 0, this turns on. The repeater gets powered, and this small command block chain runs. The first one is a clone command, grabbing this chest right here, the one that has now been filled with all of the player's items, and cloning it to here. And you'll notice this chest is empty. As the system sits right now, there is no need for this multiple backup, double copy chest system, because the player is locked out of their plot as soon as any inventory is detected. However, because this system is designed to allow for players to re-enter their plot with a stored inventory, I have this double backup system. Because if a player were allowed to re-enter their plot after their inventory has been recovered, their inventory is empty, going in and out of the plot and having their inventory cleared isn't going to cause them a problem. So you could allow them to enter and exit the plot without collecting their inventory and just have their inventory stored until they want it. But that means that every time they enter the plot, this chest will be wiped and reset with bedrock on top and empty slots on the bottom, which means if this were the only chest their inventory were saved in, it would be immediately deleted the instant they left and re-entered their plot. Now, since the current setup kicks them out of their plot and locks them out for added security, this isn't technically necessary, but these are set up such that I can allow players to re-enter their plot. So this first command block clones this chest over to that chest. This command block resets the success count here to 0, and this command block removes the sea lantern that was over the top. So if anything broke over here, that sea lantern won't be replaced with air. As long as there is something in this chest, which is the one it's been cloned to, it's powered, which goes into this repeater, which locks this repeater in the off position. So even if the player goes by, if they enter and re-exit their plot, for example, the player would be allowed to do so without pulsing the recovery system that copies this over. So the whole copy system that goes into this chest, our central chest, that is our main copy chest, that will run every single time the player enters their plot. So we have this second isolated set of command blocks that then copies that over into this chest, and then to make doubly sure that nothing could ever go wrong to delete the player's items, at least if they have one full inventory of items, is this chest is on a hopper that feeds directly into the chest below. And the reason for that is then nothing is ever, under any circumstances, copied to this location. I'm looking at solutions like an overflow chest, or tracking whether or not there's something in this hopper, which I am already doing for other reasons that we'll get to in just a second, to essentially lock the plot if someone has accidentally used the recovery system twice. Then lock the plot down. And that makes it more casually useful, but if somebody is foolish enough to make the mistake twice in a row, they get locked out of their plot until they get some sense smacked into them. And so this circuit copies our main collection chest over to the chest that sits above the hopper, and then the hopper serves as a mechanical way to get the items from that chest into another, so that there is not even a command block in this system that ever copies to this chest. If you don't have the plots locking the way that I currently do, then players will be allowed to re-enter their plot. This will run again, but because there are items in this chest, this part will not run again, and that prevents this from being overwritten, which means if there's not a separate block to bar them from entering, they could come back with a full inventory of items, which would then get copied into this chest, but because there were still items in this chest, or because there's been some sort of overflow, this comparator is still powered, this repeater is still powered, this is still locked, which means the items that get copied into this chest never get moved over to here, and never get passed into the safe chest, which means they are only recorded here by the system if a player has come back a second time with a full inventory. If the player then leaves and returns in that moment, so they, for example, step out of the plot, lose their inventory because they've stepped out of the plot, and then step back in with an empty inventory, this is the only place that second full inventory of theirs was stored. It never gets copied over to here, it immediately gets overwritten by the launch commands for the plot, and then those things are gone. So the first things you walked in with are always safe in this design, whether or not players are barred from entering their plot while they have a recovery chest active. So that's why currently players are prevented from entering the plot at all, but I'm working on an upgrade to the design that would include an overflow system, which should prevent that error. So, continuing to follow the story of a correctly recovered inventory. This block places the lantern, which runs this series of command blocks because it counts as a success. So this inventory was copied to this chest, and then ran through the hopper and found its way into this chest. And you'll see this layout is what ends up in the recovery chest at the top of the plot. So now let's talk about how that logic works. Botman now has a recovery chest next to him again, because everything ran through the system and the plot activated the recovery chest. So how does it do this? And why can't Botman access this chest yet? The reason might astonish you. There are many comparators coming off of these chests. This first one that goes backwards is the one we just talked about that prevents the copy circuit from running while there's something in this chest. This comparator only powers this command block, and all this command block does is notify the player that the system has detected an inventory. That is all this does. It is an independent command block that don't need no man, and it will notify the player using the message command that the system detected an inventory. That's all that does. Then there's another comparator that looks like it's coming off this chest from this angle, but it's actually coming off of the hopper below this chest. That means not that there's something in this top chest, but that there are yet things to make it into this chest. Because if we only waited until this was empty, then there would still be items inside the hopper that haven't yet made it into this chest. So the hopper is also connected to a comparator, and that comparator will light up as long as there's anything inside the hopper and send a signal into this block right here, which will do two things. You can see there's a torch coming off of this blackstone brick block right here, and then there are two command blocks right here, okay? This is a fairly dense circuit, so make sure you're paying attention to the line we're looking at here. So there's a hopper right there, and that leads into a comparator, which leads into a repeater, which powers this block. The first thing it does is run these two command blocks, the first of which is the one that's currently preventing players from entering their plot, because the system detected an inventory. So when this initially gets items, it will send a pulse that will activate that command block to bar them from entry, and this command block to teleport them outside their plot. So these two blocks would be removed if my overflow system works, or at least relocated, because they would need to be activated after an overflow, not after the system just runs. It was an oversight in the design that made it not completely idiot-proof, which you do want these things to be idiot-proof. Not because people are idiots, because, I mean, yeah, some people are idiots, but because people don't want to have to worry about things while they're playing a game. Or at least not about things like this. So the overflow system would be the best of both worlds, because it would allow people to use the system as casually as they like, walk in with their items, and not lose anything, but if it begins to overflow, it will immediately lock players out of their plot. So that's the first thing that the signal coming out of this hopper does, is trigger those two blocks that kick the player out of their plot and lock them out of their plot. The other thing it does, by powering this block, is depower this redstone torch, which doesn't do anything yet, but it primes these blocks to be run. It also sends a signal this direction to power this block, which depowers this torch. And this is an AND gate right here. And then when this hopper is empty, this depowers again, which depowers this block, which means this torch turns back on, and then these three blocks get powered. This first block resets the success count. That's the fucking flaw. Oh my god. I just realized something that's broken in this thing while making this video. Okay, so there's a small bug fix that will be rolling out along with this video, because you'll notice this resets the success count of a block, and the block that it resets is this one, the same one with the sea lantern from earlier. It's that same block. And the reason it does that is because the entire time this system is running, that is deactivated. Right? Because there are items in this chest while the system is running, which means this is powered, which means this is powered, which means this is locked, which means nothing can reset the success count on this. Nothing can be copied over to ruin the items that are in here, but that also means that this is not running the way it's supposed to. And this has actually been catching a bug that I couldn't find. Because this lantern, the sea lantern would still be here, even though it seemed like everything was running normally. And because the sea lantern would be here, nothing would be copied. And sometimes the system would break, and I couldn't figure out why. It's because this block right here needs to be duplicated. And in fact, I'm going to do it right now. It needs to go right here and get the same command, and all we need to do is take the coordinates of this block, which is the command block, and increase the Y value by 1. What this piece of the circuit does, and was supposed to do the entire time, and now I realize why that was going on, is if a player has entered and exited their plot while the whole circuit was running, that means this was locked, which means the success count was never reset on this block, but it also means the sea lantern was never removed. Oh, that makes so much sense. That was pretty dumb, everybody. Okay, back to my genius plan that's absolutely perfect and works 100% of the time. The hopper is empty, which means the filling of this chest is completed. So we can finally reset the success count and put the air back above that block if it hasn't already been done. But that also means we can do a very important clone command and also notify the player of the results of that command. And as you can see here, it says inventory recovered. Press the stone button on the south side of your plot to recover your items. So what this clone command is doing is taking this section and cloning it up on the south side of the plot. So if we go back and look at Botman's account, you can see that what I'm looking at here is the exact same thing. And what that actually contains at that moment in time in the chest is absolutely nothing. That chest is empty, and it is there purely for looks. So for now, the chest is locked, and that's actually because the chest is empty. But that's what gets copied up there so that the player has something to interact with, and it also places the necessary command blocks for the system to function. So yes, even this section brings yet more command blocks into the picture, because I think just because I'm mentally unwell. I don't know why I do this to myself. So, what's all the logic in here then? Well, there's not very much. I can show you what it is by peeling away this top layer here. And you can see that this chest is connected to a comparator. So you can see that this chest is empty, both because we can look inside it and see that it's empty, and because this comparator is not on. But this comparator feeds directly into this block, which will, as long as there's something in the chest, depower this torch, which basically leaves it primed to launch these two command blocks. This gets copied up to the surface with an empty chest, basically ready to go. So when the player presses this stone button, it will activate this command block, which places a red stone block in a circuit down here. And that location happens to be right there. And when it places that redstone block, that powers this repeater, which powers this block, which powers this repeater. And that will power this command block and start the chain that actually takes the items from this chest and puts them into the chest that's up on the surface where Botman is. It will then remove the redstone block that was right here, and then this block is activated, which is the only time that anything is ever copied to this chest. And this circuit is outside of the main circuit. It can't be activated by anything in here. The only thing that can possibly activate this circuit is if that recovery chest is in the correct spot and the player presses the button. And what will happen is this third block will then copy this empty template chest down to this location, and then the final block just tells the player that their inventory is returned and ready to recover from the chest. So what's the deal with this AND gate? Well, you don't want this happening under very many circumstances. In fact, there's only one. And that circumstance is the chest is placed and waiting, along with the module and the button. There are items in this chest, and the button has been pressed. And so this AND gate ensures that that's the case. OR gate. This is an OR gate. And this OR gate ensures that that's the case. I've been saying AND gate the whole time. It's not an AND gate, it's an OR gate. But it ensures that that's the case. This line is powered if there's anything in the hopper, which will depower this torch here, and will leave this torch powered. So if there's anything in the hopper, this torch is powered, this redstone line lights up, this repeater gets activated, this repeater gets locked. So you cannot run the circuit to actually call the chest up if either of these are live. So if there's anything in the hopper, there will be no running of this command chain. But also, if there's nothing in the chest, there will be no running of this command chain. Which, there never really should be a reason in the redstone logic that players would have access to the button to run this command chain. Because remember, that button is over here. That button is a part of this segment that needs to be copied up to the surface. So unless that's already happened, which means there's something in this chest, they would have no way to press the button anyway. So basically what it does is it prevents them from being able to spam the system if there's some sort of glitch or bug or something I didn't foresee. It's an extra layer of security to make sure that that's the only circumstance under which that button can be pressed. So technically this would serve to some degree as our overflow, because if there were more items than fit in this chest, then the recovery system breaks. This chest is not cleared of anything. It basically just freezes the system. So it does have a built-in overflow of whatever remaining space is in this chest, because we did copy over a full inventory worth of items. So this number of slots, what is this, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 slots are still available, plus the 5 that are inside every hopper. So there's that amount of overflow in the system, but then anything that's still in this chest would be at risk. So essentially the addition I want to make to the system is expand the overflow so that it's the size of a full double chest, and then at that point lock off the plot so that people can't enter. It's workable logic. I just need to figure out how to fit it in here. And although there is a lot of room, I'm trying to keep this as compact as possible, just in case I want to add features. So I think we're caught up until the point that the items are returned to the chest. You can see on my main account, this is where the redstone block is going to appear, and then that circuit will be run. So we press the button, the redstone block appears and then disappears as soon as it's run, and Botman can access his items again. They're all in the chest exactly as they appeared, and if we look in this account, there is no longer anything in this chest. So we can pull those items down, and we can even leave this chest and come back to it. That's okay. We can do that. Nothing is lost, because that comparator right here, this is what actually makes the whole thing go away when you've emptied the chest. So as long as there are items in the chest, you are in the clear. There is no way that a player can lose their items or have things disappear. They can take some of the stuff out. If they need to put armor on and then collect the rest of their items, that is perfectly okay. Everything is here exactly as it was originally. I missed that item there. Snake that really quick. Okay, and you see it immediately disappears because of this comparator. As soon as this chest is empty, this comparator deactivates, and this torch turns back on, which runs this command, chest access deny, which basically resets the area that this chest is located in to the default setting that prevents players from accessing the chest. So they're given access to this area when they press the button. They press the button, it copies the redstone block over that runs the circuit, then it replaces the button with a quartz slab so that it's no longer pressable, which means that players can't double pulse the system. And then it gives players access to the chest in this region. So that's what happens when the chest is activated, and then when it's emptied, this comparator returns to an unpowered state. This redstone torch is repowered, and then this command block chain is run, which removes players' chest access, reallows players to enter their plot, and replaces the entire chest recovery area with a default section of road. The only thing that would need to be different, if you have the type of plot that's set up such that players can re-enter with the overflow system, the only thing that will need to change is I'll need to add a command block into the system that allows players to use, it would be the use flag inside this region only when you're outside of your plot. And what that does is it prevents players from being able to press the button from inside their plot, which would then recover the items into their chest that they would then be able to take out while they were still in their plot, and then walk out of their plot and lose their things. So to the best of my ability, that's my explanation of how the recovery works. The more items the player had in their inventory, the longer it takes to feed. But that's why the player is notified that their inventory has been recovered, or that it's been detected. And then you can see it appears on the screen as soon as it's recovered. They get the notification that it's recovered. But I left it open here so that you can actually see what's going on. So as soon as Botman takes the last item out of that chest, that comparator is going to turn off, that torch is going to turn on, and that will run the command blocks that cause the whole system to disappear. So as soon as Botman takes that last item, that will all happen. Just all at once. There are multiple failsafes to ensure that nothing is lost in the recovery process, at least guaranteed for one full inventory. One full inventory, or your money back. That covers the longest and most complicated leg of the circuit that runs. I think you've probably aged about 25 years since I said this, but the circuit that runs from this initial redstone block, that's leg number 1. The biggest and most complicated leg of the circuit. But there are other things that need to happen to make this plot function. The most important of which you may recognize from earlier in the video, where I showed you that players do not have access to potions, cannot activate nether portals, and the like. Those all come out of these command blocks. The blocks that players aren't allowed to place, for example, end portal frames, dispensers, and ender chests, those blocks are actually prevented by World Guard. And that would have been the simplest way to do all of this, except it doesn't work for everything. World Guard can only prevent players from modifying the world, which means if they need to place the block to do the thing that I don't want them to do, then that works out great, because then I can just say that they're not allowed to place that block. However, if the issue is instead that the player can't even have the item because it's either a drinkable item, like a potion, throwable, like a splash or a lingering potion, I need to use these repeating command blocks. So the whole time the player is in the plot, these command blocks spam. No experience bottles, no splash potions, no golden apples, no spectral arrows, no command blocks, no potions, no lingering potions, no tipped arrows of any kind, no repeating command blocks, no chain command blocks, and then we have a few special ones here, 1, 2, and 3, which split up the plot into 3 sections, vertically, and that's just because the fill command has limits on how much volume it can actually access. I've split the plot up into essentially 3 equal regions, and each of those command blocks are constantly spamming to replace nether portal blocks. So the actual portal block itself, it will replace that with air anywhere it appears inside the plot. For the nether portal, that's what's being spammed, and then for anything that's in the player's inventory, it's just a very specific clear command. Add a specific item to the end of the clear command, and it'll remove anything of that type from the player's inventory. So that's it for this section. Just spamming repeating command blocks that are powered every time the system is active, and then they're depowered when the redstone block is removed. And that's it. We'll save this one for last. This is the circuit that is activated when the redstone block is removed. So there's a redstone torch right here. When the redstone block is placed, that turns off, and then when the redstone block is removed, this turns back on, which powers this short little circuit that tells the player that creative mode is disabled, puts them back in survival mode, clears their inventory, denies their build permissions within the plot, denies their use permissions within the plot, allows their use permissions within their recovery area. So over on the left side of the command, you can see it says region, flag, creative A, and then it has what world it's in, who is allowed to access the command, who is triggering the command, what the flag is, and what the status is. But this one is only for creative A. Creative A is the plot itself, whereas here we have creative A dash, which is the small region next to the plot that contains the recovery chest. So this is kind of a legacy command block from when players were allowed to re-enter their plot. Until the overflow system is put into place, this won't really serve any purpose, but the whole point there is that while a player is inside their plot, they're not allowed to press the button because that breaks the system, but this command block gives them use permissions inside that region, which would let them press the stone button and recover their items. So right now, this is not serving a purpose, but that is what it was for and what it will be for when the overflow system is figured out. Then we have a simple command. This is the command on entry flag, which, as you might recall, is this one right here, which is the one that kicks non-members out of the plot as soon as they enter it to prevent the entry and exit circuits from breaking. And the way you remove a flag is you state the whole command, and then you just don't say anything else. If you don't type anything else, it takes that to mean unset the flag. So it's not yes or no, there's no specific setting on that flag whatsoever, which means it will behave in the default manner. In this case, that means players are once again allowed to, non-members, people that are not part of the plot, people that are not members of this plot, not allowed to use it, or they are once again allowed to enter the plot so that they can check out the builds people made. And then the final block teleports the player to themselves in order to knock them out of any UI they're in, so it prevents the chest access while being pushed out of the plot method that I showed earlier in the video. So this just teleports the player to themselves using the Essentials version, the Essentials X plugin version of the teleport command, not the default Minecraft teleport command, because the default Minecraft teleport command won't do anything if you ask it to teleport a player to themselves, whereas this one will actually enact that, even though there's nowhere to send the player. It runs a teleport command anyway, and that kicks the player out of the UI. I actually just noticed another bug. And I mentioned to you a moment ago that command on entry here gets wiped so that players don't, or so that non-members don't get teleported away if they try and enter the plot. So if we look at the very beginning here, non-members entry deny. So that's all well and good, except we also need to re-allow players to enter the plot. So there are two command blocks that I actually found missing in the design, and that's because I kind of tried to rush it out for use, because the people on the server that I'm running are, you guys are, trustworthy. I don't need to worry about you trying to break these just to cheat the game. In general, you definitely would want that fixed. And then you might be wondering what this last circuit is back here. Well, After all of this was working, it turned out there was one more pretty significant problem. The default game mode on the server is survival, and the server is set to force that game mode. And what it means when a game mode is forced is that if a player was in a different game mode last time they logged on, and they try to log back in, they will be automatically reset to the forced game mode, which in the case of this server is survival. But what that means is that a player could lose connection, or have to sign off, or get kicked, or whatever might happen while they were inside their plot, and if they had placed themselves somewhere that was precarious, or that they were unable to walk out of, those players would be stuck. Now, their inventory would be cleared the instant they left their plot, so there's no issue with game breaking, but there is an issue with soft locking there. To combat that, I added this last module right here. And this module is a player detecting system. So it's only activated if the player turns their plot on. Other than that, this system sits idle, not doing anything at all. You can see these are two large hopper timers right here. Not super large, but reasonably large. And this one's locked by this torch, and this one's locked by this torch. So as a default, this system does nothing while the player is not in the plot. So let's get into how this module detects that, first of all, and then I'll show you what it does if it does detect a player that has been disconnected. Right now, this hopper timer is locked. So when Botman walks into the plot, you can see that the redstone block is placed, and this torch is deactivated, which means that this hopper timer has turned on. And you can see there's a block of bedrock that's just cycling through all of these command blocks in a little snake, just so that this isn't running constantly. And so every time the item that's cycling through these hoppers goes by, you can see the comparator lights up, and the circuit goes. So that comparator powers this block right here, which splits the signal in two directions. One delays the signal by 1 tick and passes it into this block. The other passes it directly into this block. And all this block is doing is trying to pull down the player's position. You might remember, if a command block is successful, then it has a data value called success count, which goes up by 1, and then would power any connected comparators. So as long as the player is in the game, so if the player has moved, and then it runs again, you can see the values are different. So you can see this is now minus 380. If I back out of the command block, and I move the player again, and then it runs again, this is now minus 368. So that's the first thing that happens. And then there's this delayed signal right here. And the reason it's delayed is if it wasn't, then this comparator wouldn't be doing anything, because what it's doing right now is locking this repeater. So every single time this goes by, because this line is faster than this line, the command block will always try to run its command before this signal gets here. And if it's successful, then it locks this repeater. But if the player has left the game, then this is no longer able to pull down a position, and it fails, which means the success count does not go up by 1, which means this comparator does not get powered, which means this repeater does not get locked, which means the shutdown circuit runs. And we'll get into that shutdown circuit in just a moment, but you can see what's happening here, how this repeater is being prevented from running by the successful player check that happens every single time it goes by. And then whether the player check is successful or not, the signal passes through 4 ticks, because a repeater always comes with a 1 tick delay, so there's a maximum of 4 ticks delay out of a repeater because of the 3 setting options. So this is a 4 tick delay right here. I think. I'm feeling dumb right now. Talking through all this thing has turned my brain to mush. So anyway, maximum delay right here, and that's why this stays on for a moment rather than turning off immediately like it does in the recovery circuit. And all this block is doing is resetting the success count of this block back to 0, which turns that comparator back off again. What happens if there is no player is this command block doesn't run successfully, which means this comparator doesn't power, which means the signal moves through here. And so you're going to watch that happen as soon as I disconnect. So he disconnects, and then you can see that time it ran. So this circuit is now being powered because the success count of this has gone up by 1. And what it has done is turned off the circuit. You'll notice the redstone block is now gone. So, watching it again, you can see that the redstone block is there, and then as soon as the player disconnects, the next pass of the bedrock block, the shutdown circuit will run immediately. So the player disconnects, the circuit notices he's not there right now, and then you see the block disappears, this gets powered, and then this torch is depowered, which means this hopper timer has started running, which is also passing bedrock around in a circle at a much higher rate. Just because, ideally, I want this to catch the player as they're loading into the world. Sometimes it still doesn't get them immediately, but most of the time, it gets the player as they're loading in my experience. Every time this is going by, it's pulsing this command block that's running the exact same command to check for the player's position, but as you can see, since there's no player, nothing happens. So it's the exact inverse of this circuit right here. A much simpler circuit to run, actually. The circuit that is supposed to run when a player is missing, that's much more complicated than the circuit that runs when the player arrives, because this is basically just waiting for a success. Whereas that one is waiting for a failure, and it doesn't count failures, it only counts successes. So it's a little more complicated to achieve. This is running every single time you see that comparator lighting up. This command is trying to run, but the player isn't here, so it doesn't run successfully. But when the player returns, this comparator gets powered, which powers this command block, setting the success count of that one back to 0 and depowering this comparator. That's the first thing it does. The second thing it does is reset the success count on this block over here so that the entire return circuit is disabled, and it's reset to its default state of everything being off. It teleports the player to a safe location outside their plot to prevent anybody from being soft-locked. It notifies the player that they were disconnected while in creative mode, and then it clears their inventory of anything that would still be on them if there were any sort of glitch as a result of their disconnect that caused them to still have items. There's a clear command just to make sure, and I think it depends on the timing as they sign back in. If they're teleported before they're actually in the world, then I think that means they still have their inventory. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't when they're teleported out during that load-in process, so I added this command at the very end just to make sure that that was the last thing that happened and there's no way they ended up with any inventory. So with that, I think I've talked about every command block in here, but let's watch that last thing happen on Botman's screen, and in fact, we'll watch it in full screen so that you can see how that works. So if you were Botman, and say we burrowed down, right? In survival, you wouldn't be able to get out of here like you can in creative. That hole is obviously far too deep to jump out of. You would be completely trapped if you relogged and found yourself in this hole in survival. You would have the ability to dig without this recovery circuit, because the plot wouldn't have been turned off, but it would take a long time to get out of here, and if this were made out of something you couldn't dig, you would be absolutely, completely trapped. So to prevent people from getting hornswoggled by their own mistakes, here's what happens if this player were to disconnect. And if they're off for more than a couple of seconds, then the circuit runs. Sometimes if you relog immediately, the circuit won't run, but if you just log off, wait a moment, and log back on, everything will be completely fine. So if the player tries to log back on, we were in that hole, and suddenly we are not. You'll notice we are over here, and we were actually moved over here while we were loading in, so it's something the player doesn't even notice. But, more or less, that's kind of it. That is every command block in here, how it works, what it does, and how the plots function. It's not perfect. We talked about the fact that this recovery system is a little bit overkill in spite of the fact that players can be locked out of their plot while the recovery is waiting, so this isn't really necessary, but if you wanted to run it, even without the overflow chest that I've been talking about throughout this video, if you just wanted to run it as it is right now, this system is fully outfitted to do that. It prevents players from clicking on this button unless they leave their plot. So there's no way to break this system other than returning with another full inventory of items. So if you trust the players on your server to not make that mistake, then you're probably going to be fine. But if you want to be extra cautious, you just want to add these 2 blocks right here that will prevent players from entering their plot and teleport them out of the plot. So there were a couple of missing blocks that I needed to add that I'll go and pass around to the currently active plots in this area. These 2 right here we discovered over the course of this video, which explain 2 small little bugs that were caused by a last-minute change to the layout before these went live. So that was actually really fortunate, because I was wondering what was going on with that. But with that... Ooh, that's creepy. That's the end of the video. I'm all done for today. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. It has been an absolute blast as always. I hope you enjoyed learning about how the creative plots on the UECraft server work. If you'd like to join the UECraft server, we don't have very many spaces available, but you can check out my Discord and check out the sign-up sheet. So, you know, sign up for that sheet. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. It's been a blast as always, showing you guys how these creative plots work and all of the pain that went into making them happen. I'm looking forward to hearing all of the horrific problems that are present in this design in the comments below. Thank you so much to the patrons. You guys keep this server alive, you keep the channel alive, I really appreciate it. And that's it. I'm out now. That's everything I got, so bye-bye.